Okay, we're live. Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to quickly introduce Stephanie Brindley of Murphy & Son, who are going to talk a little bit about yeast and nutrition. And we're hoping to be joined also by Kieran Atkinson, who is a winemaker and cider maker and knows his stuff. So I'm going to hand over to you, Stephanie.
Thank you very much, Simon.
I'll be joining you soon. Give me a shout if you need anything.
Okay, yep. So I'll just get the old presentation up. There we go. So yes, hi everyone. My name's Steph, and I'm a technical sales rep at Murphy & Son. I'm not sure if you've all heard of us before. We're sort of better known for supplying the beer making industry, but we also do supply things for making cider and wine as well. So just wanted to have a quick talk about that today. I'm mainly going to be focusing on yeast and nutrition. So when I'm thinking about setting up a fermentation, because that's what you're doing to make your cider, you've got to think about what ingredients you're putting in there. So I just thought I'd highlight the fact that your apples, obviously there's some variation, which is down to the biochemical composition. It's mainly related to the variety, the maturity of the apple, as well as the agronomic and climatic conditions. But in general, you can say that they're 85% water, and then quite a small fraction, really, 12 to 14% carbohydrates, and then some organic acids, protein, and lipids and minerals and vitamins. So let's just focus on those for a second. Your carbohydrate fraction, that includes sugars, starches, and fibers. Your two main monosaccharides in apples are glucose and fructose, which you can see on the left here. And then your main disaccharide is sucrose, which is made up of a glucose and a fructose molecule. And then you've got desorbitol in the form of alcoholic sugar. That's abundant in apples. In addition to this, all fruits contain cellulose, hemicellulose, and pectin. So I've just included the pectinase here just to highlight that you're going to need to add that if you want to break open those pectins to help release more of those sugars, which would be available for fermentation. And also it's going to help to make a nice clear cider at the end of that. Sweetness is an important factor. However, if the fermentation is allowed to go to completion, all of the sugars contained in the apples are fermentable. So this results in a dry cider. In order to achieve sweetness, you can either prematurely stop the fermentation before it's completed, or you can add a sweetening substance afterwards. So stopping the fermentation prematurely is a process known as keeving. The problem with the sugar being left over as it's a fermentable, you need to be aware that this could kickstart a fermentation again. So you have to be really careful that there's no yeast or bacteria left in there. Obviously, commercially, this problem is circumvented by filtering or pasteurizing the cider to remove any of those microbes. On a small scale, this is harder to achieve. Manufacturers can either wait several months after fermentation to ensure that the yeast is dead before adding the sugar, or resort to other methods. The main alternative, obviously, is to add an unfermentable sweetener. Saccharin has been used in some ciders, but there's a noticeable aftertaste. So sucralose has been a newer alternative, which has become more popular. Okay, so organic acids and phenolic compounds. Obviously, the big one here is malic acid. It's the main organic acid found in apples. You get citric acid as well in very low concentration. And in fact, there's about 9 to 12 acids in total, but in very small fractions. So we talk about the acidity of apples. They can vary from 0.1 to 2.5 grams of malic acid per 100 grams of juice. And this is important because you can convert malic acid to lactic acid during a malolactic fermentation. And that lactic acid lowers the overall acidity of the cider and leads to a rounder flavour depending on the bacterial strain that you've used. And it can also alter the mouthfeel, but you can still stay true to the varietal character of the apple. And you may want to consider using a nutrient to make sure that you have a full and proper conversion here. And obviously the other added benefit is the production of carbon dioxide. So you get a carbonated drink. Another class of compounds which can influence the taste of the cider are tannins. We're most acquainted with the idea of tannins being present in red wine, but they're also found in apples and so by extension ciders. Chemically, they're polyphenols. These are formed from phenolic compounds. And in terms of taste, they contribute a bitterness and an astringency. And finally, we've got those lipids, vitamins, and minerals. So you've got very low lipid content. You've got a few vitamins here, C, B12, D, and E. And the mineral table here, it's important to remember that this is in milligrams per 100 grams of dry matter. So obviously, like I said at the beginning, an apple is around 85% water. So these are really, really small amounts of minerals. And these all play vital roles in converting tolerance to several abiotic stresses during growth. So like salinity, drought, metal toxicity, UV radiation. And obviously this is perfect for the apple, but this is not enough nutrients to keep up with the demand of yeast during fermentation. So let's think about an optimal fermentation. You need good nutrition, as I've just said. Yeast nutrients can give the yeast an extra boost that will help them complete that fermentation. It also helps to achieve a lower final gravity and a drier tasting cider with less residual sugar. So it just gives you that option if you want to add the sweetness back at the end. So we've got inorganic nitrogen, lipids and sterols, vitamins and minerals, and amino acids. So as I said before, some of these things are in very low amounts in the apple. So maybe we just consider that we just want to add inorganic nitrogen and see how that goes. So we're just going to add DAP here and see what happens in our fermentation. And as you can see, we've got this fast budding and short lag time. So we've got a fast fermentation start due to the speed of that budding and an increase in biomass in a very short space of time. This in turn decreases the overall nutrient availability and causes stress on the cells. And this has happened because inorganic nitrogen it's a bit like fast food for yeast, and that's why they've been able to do it so quickly. When nutrients become an issue for yeast, they have to start turning to themselves. So yeast amino acids then have to be consumed, so that they're sort of having to eat other yeast cells. And this makes up for the shortfall. These contain what we call S compounds, which when liberated produce off flavors like rotten eggs and asparagus. You can get a soapy taste because of the pH, and it's often described as short and not full-bodied. So this is because the yeast was fast, but it wasn't fit. And obviously these unfit yeast then decline in viability. Like I said, you get these off flavors, there's a high SO2 demand. And ultimately, you can get stuck fermentation, which means you're stuck with fermentable sugars and it's not finished. So let's go back to that optimal fermentation, where we've added the lipids and sterols, the right vitamins and minerals and amino acids. You now have that nice cell membrane stability and high fermentation rate and alcohol tolerance. You've got a reduction in SO2 demand and an increase in cell viability. And you're able to produce those fruit aromas rather than those off flavors. So this is because you've got those essential bionutrients that are available for the yeast. You won't get a stuck fermentation, and at the end of fermentation, you'll get improved yeast flocculation. So you'll get a nice clear cider, and you'll get better aroma and better taste. So this is all about consistency. Everything for the yeast can be added. It can be fast and fit. And you can make that same cider that you made last time, and you can be confident that you can make it again next time. Okay, so now we've got the right substrate for the yeast to grow in, we need to think about the selection of an appropriate yeast strain. It's crucial to control the alcohol yield and preserve the beverage's sensory quality. Yeast metabolism produces different metabolites and byproducts that may have an essential impact on the taste and smell. So we all know that the apple varieties can change the taste of a cider. But you can take those same apples and use different yeast strains and end up with different flavors. And you can use that to confer to a customer preference. You can also split things up. So you could take a massive batch of apples that you've pressed and split it into two and use two different yeast strains and make two completely different ciders. The criteria on selecting yeast strains for their use in cider is primarily on their capability to dominate the media and improve the desired sensorial characteristics and their inability to produce undesired compounds, such as biogenic amines and off odors. So the reason I say that is obviously you really want to choose one that's going to take over. You don't want, while there's fermentable sugars available, you don't want some contamination being able to get in and take over instead. Many might be described as clean or neutral in their effects, producing little in the way of added estery aromas or yeast-derived flavors. Others are specifically targeted at aromatic enhancement, often developing fruity esters reminiscent of apples and pears. Finally, there are specialty yeasts, mostly borrowed from the beer brewing practice, that introduce dramatically different aromas, such as like barnyard funk of Brettanomyces and other flavors like that. So I just thought I'd highlight, maybe 4 different yeast strains here. Starting off with Saftlager S23, which this is a dry yeast derived originally from VLB Berlin, a German brewery. It produces fruity and estery lager beers in its primary role, and it can bring these similar effects to your ciders, although it may be a bit subdued compared to the fruity wine yeast or fruity cider yeast. And as with the lager fermentation, you should use it at the right temperatures, which is about 12 to 15 degrees C. It's got a lower attenuation profile than some other lager yeasts and may leave a slight residual sweetness and an alcohol tolerance of 9 to 11%, which should be fine for natural sugar ciders, but may not accommodate if you, any apple wines with added sugars, if that's what you were considering making. So next we've got the Saft cider. We could consider this as an aromatic yeast to use. This is a Bayana strain that is effective at fermenting cider even under difficult conditions. It has a wide fermentation temperature tolerance of 10 to 30 degrees C, and it's rated to 11%, which again should be fine for those natural ciders, but not for making any apple wines. Next up is EC1118, which I'm sure is very familiar with all of you. It's a very traditional choice among the champagne style yeast. It's another Bayana strain, and it has a high alcohol tolerance of about 18%. So this is a great choice if you were thinking about an apple wine, but it's still great for those lower ABV ciders. This yeast would be a good neutral choice, sorry. The character of the apples themselves will be on display, and with little contribution from the yeast. This is usually finishes bone dry with no hint of sweetness. And then finally, we've got 71B from Lallemand. This is favoured by some cider makers, particularly when faced with a blend of apples that may be too high in acid to produce a well-balanced cider. 71B partially metabolizes malic acid at like 20 to 40%. The dominant acid of apples, as I mentioned earlier, and it reduces the sharpness and rounds the product flavour off. It's also estery, although some users can report a buttery note, which will be down to diacetyl production. So it's up to you if you think that is desirable. We can help you avoid diacetyl production if you like, so please get in touch if that's an issue for you. And the alcohol tolerance for that one is 14%. So just a quick final note. Thank you all for listening to that. I just wanted to make sure that you don't forget about cleaning. We can provide cleaning products. So think about clean in place, your acid cleans, and we also have an enzymatic cleaner, which you don't need any high temperature water for, and it's really good at cleaning your vessels. and also your sterilizer in place, and we've got peracetic acid. And if you ever have any issues with these, or if you want any help calculating the rates that they need to be used at, please get in touch. We're more than happy to do that for you. So thanks for listening today. If you've got any questions, obviously we're at the booth. You know, get in touch via that or the Q&As. Otherwise, you know, please get in touch with us directly. That's our email addresses and telephone numbers. Thank you again.
Thank you, Steph. That was really interesting, and interesting on the yeasts at the end there. I know 71B was always the cider yeast to go to. Certainly, when I started making cider, that was the one. And I think for me, it works really well with dessert apples. You mentioned about the reduction of the acidity. Dessert apples often, particularly things like Brindley, may be a little bit thin and less in. Need that bit of estery help and softening. Yeah. That's great. Thank you for doing that, Steph. And I'm going to take you off the stage now. And anyone that has any questions must go and see you at your booth, where you and Kieran can answer all those lovely questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, now.